Hi, everybody. Paul from the Data Storytellers here. Today, I'm with Bojan Duric, who's the Chief Data Officer at the City of Virginia Beach. Great to have you with us.
Good to be here, and thank you for inviting me and giving me opportunity to share some of my experience with you.
Yeah, and I'm excited to take a deep dive into that. To start with, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what really brought you to your current role.
Yes, thank you. As a matter of fact, let me start just to say what I feel I am. I recently read some book and I discovered that I'm everyday learner rather than lifelong learner. So I'm everyday learner, ending up in the data and analytics field since early 2000s. Not intended to be. There was no how to put this, formal education to be in the data field. So data field was kind of sitting within the business unit. So I grew up with involved in the whole this hype that comes with the data. Ended up in computer science, hoping that I'm going to do something like really kind of exciting in the software industry, and ended up working in Excel files for next 15 years. So from Excel to the big data hype and all of that, I'm just blessed to be part of the whole well-deserved the data industry that we see today. So formal education, computer science, New Jersey, Rutgers University, ending up working in the sales, then marketing, wherever industry was core competence. I'm seeing data to be one of the major drivers in decisions. So now everybody is especially with the growth of the digital and internet actually gave a big push, and technology has kind of democratized the data in the sense data became almost a part of everyday's life. Did I answer the question, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to touch on is the core competencies that you mentioned. Can you just dive into that a little bit? What you mean by that? Do you mean data literacy in this context, or do you mean something else?
Business core competence. I was thinking let's say in how the data works, it's almost like you have a data in the middle of technology. Technology is an enabler. Business, where you're making decision, and people are they skilled in competency and literacy, if you say. But most of the business are always focusing where their core competence is. So if I'm in a sales-driven industry, the data analyst, and the strongest point would be either in sales, marketing, and I always said at the end, data people live with the finance. So that was the earliest way of us quantifying the success. And when someone start talking about the data numbers, they always kind of end up working with the finance. So then the other competency is, let's say, if you are supply chain, then the data is utilized hugely on the operational efficiency, while maybe on the sales and marketing, you have two-pronged, could be value add, trying to leverage the data to see where you can kind of add additional value in your offering. And later, it's, as I said, in the finance, where you actually work not only from the operational efficiency, you're talking about the sanity, like how ROI, everybody pulls back and say, listen, what's the ROI? And that's where the data comes. So financial analysts are great start for the data field. Then I don't want to misrepresent the huge that we have now from the social science, but the earliest form from the business, it's driven from the marketing, operational efficiency, from the supply chain and finance.
And just moving on to your most current role, you've been with the City of Virginia Beach since March 2018. Tell us some of the things you're getting up to over there in terms of leveraging data within a big company.
Yes. So let me just so Virginia Beach is the largest city in the Virginia. So not lots of people know that. It is almost 500,000, but part of the even bigger metropolitan area called Hampton Roads. So it's altogether almost 2 million people. So really a densely populated part of the Virginia as the whole, and we are coastal community, so we kind of like enjoy both like nice weather and beaches that we have, and I invite everybody to see and come and visit Virginia that we're trying to offer. And at the same time, from the data perspective, as the coastal community, we are really aware of the whole sea level rise and the climate changes that's happening. So where we try to leverage some data. So I joined the city in March 2018, and as a first chief data officer, so a huge challenge, 8,000 big people, big organization with no data history or culture. So the biggest piece of my whole work was building the data-driven culture. And as everybody can know, like that's not easy job. So it takes the whole village, and persistence, communication, being ready like to adapt, to see, because the culture cannot be changed completely. And I always said, listen, you can build that. I believe it's at record. It's a culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that proves always to be true. I couldn't make any data-driven strategy before I actually start influencing and being the kind of like changing the culture, like change agent in that sense. So changing the culture and influencing is a huge part, and a lots of energy that I put in.
And you're in quite a unique position. You know, a lot of the companies we work with, they've tended to adapt these kind of changes as a result of, you know, they want more money, or they want to do better by their employees. I guess in government, it's a little different to that. From your own experience, what were the biggest challenges of implementing, even creating this, not just implementing, but creating this data-driven culture, specifically within the city of Virginia Beach?
So that's actually really now goes back nicely to what we said, where the data people lives, and when someone actually starts developing the data-driven culture, it's driven by the business, core business level. So someone wants to be operationally efficient, so they start building the whole culture. And you can tie it back in the commercial sector and private sector, while in the public sector it's definitely different. And our customers are our residents. We need to be more aware how we spend the money, what we cover, and what we are actually offering to our residents. So the stakeholder is not the CEO. Then you go like with the stocks, or if you publicly if you're public company, so you go out and measure your success through that. But in our sense, it's like how livable we are, how much we can attract the people. And lastly, and I would say the most important, what is the mechanism for us to accept the feedback, which is the communication. And usually that comes back and forth within the exchanging the data. And one of the first efforts when I took the position was how we can expand and populate a little bit and promote the open data initiatives. The second one was in that open data initiatives, how we can collaborate with the other municipalities, localities within the Hampton Road. So when we talk about the sea level rise, if you isolate your attempt in Virginia Beach, how is that affecting, and how is that like with the neighboring city, which is just like a couple of miles from you? So collaboration is the huge piece, and coordination among the other municipalities, and all of us are somehow independent. So I always said we run the same race, but not at the same pace. Mm-hmm. And we don't have the same priorities, maybe. So open data was one of the initiatives where I tried to include more, to put us all on the same platform, and we call that Open City. In that platform, we start sharing some of the data sets, so someone can actually use the data that we offer and slice and dice in the ways they prefer. The other one is like to be more transparent how we're spending the money. So it's open out there and saying, listen, this is like your taxpayer money. This is what we get, and how this is how we distribute this, so everybody can be aware where the money go. And the last piece is on the sea level rise. We inform them each. So we have the storm sense, which is regional effort among the 5 cities in the Hampton Road, and we are just showing where something is from the sea level rise, so the people can get more and more educated, since we are getting into more of how we can tackle the sea level rise in next 20 years. So everybody needs to bring the awareness. And now if I talk even from the marketing language, is going to be building the awareness among our residents, and in this form it's going to be customers, so they are aware what's happening. So this is the first step.
Yeah, and you've brought up a lot of really interesting stuff. I want to dive into there. You mentioned like let's take a company like Pepsi. You know, if you're the chief data officer at Pepsi, it doesn't matter how many cans of Pepsi people drink. You know, you're still going to get the same salary. You might even get some of the same results. That being said, when you talk about you know, where your funding comes from, that's taxpayer. Everyone pays taxes. That's a very emotive subject. And obviously we're called the data storytellers. And what we're really interested in is some of the ways in which you can convey a strong message to your stakeholders. So with that in mind, what are some of the best practices you found with convincing residents or convincing other stakeholders of the value of data?
That's a really good question. And as a matter of fact, our budget is not like infinite. So we kind of always, like everybody else, work on the tight budget. The other thing is like, as you mentioned in the private sector, especially in the consumer packaged goods, especially if you ask for the budget, then you deliver. If you don't deliver, they take. In our case, when we ask for the money, that's kind of like you asking either additional taxes, which is really unpopular and most likely it's not going to happen, or you working from the operational efficiency, so you cost avoidance perspective, you avoid some of the costs, so you reinvest your money that you had. So you're trying to be operational efficient from that side, from the budget perspective. So that's one of the way we actually use the data to see where we need to spend some money and where we actually can modernize. And if we don't provide this service, because it's already a legacy service, so we're going to start fading down this one, because you always, with the government, you always have to have the couple of alternatives. So the data is leveraged on this side, where we can put more and start shifting, let's put this way, customers on one side. The other is like, which recently happened, and during some of the election that we have local questions asked, and one of the question was like one of the unpopular one, raising the taxes and to get the additional funding to tackle the sea level rise. So that's where we actually utilize the data. That's where we utilize some researchers that we had from the third party, and we utilize the data to convey the message. If we increase the tax for this much, which is going to affect you this little, this is how much as community we're going to gain 10 years from now. So when people do have that information, if someone is saying we're raising the taxes, you're going to say immediately no. But if you say I'm going to just raise 0.1 cent per thousand of real estate, which then you can calculate how much is going to affect you, we're going to get this much money, and this is what we're going to do. You laid down the project. So that's what we did, and it was successful. By the way, nobody actually felt any bad taste with raising that taxes that little and how much you gain. That the whole is like, yes, I invest this much, but what I'm getting, and you can, with the data, you kind of can picture it or paint it, or storytelling, as we say. You just tell the story.
And did that successful process, did that come from, you know, previously trying to say, hey, we're raising your taxes, and people saying, whoa, hang on, there's this emotional reaction that's deeply embedded in the brain of like, that's going to affect me negatively, so I don't care about the details? Or did that come from, did you bring that to the organization as like, okay, maybe we need to look at this in a different perspective?
So I wouldn't say that that's me. As I said, it's take the village. I would say that the culture change over the 4 years, that's data becoming more and more kind of prominent partner in discussion. So we did it all the time. Yes, we were doing this always, and we are getting some noisy complaints, and like squeaky wheel gets the grease, then your question is going to be, are we actually satisfying what is for the community or only the loud ones? And when you actually start leveraging the data and start pulling that out and saying, okay, let me see where that noise is coming, is that really relevant or it's just perception? Then you share and put that out like for the consideration, and all of the people start saying, okay, let me actually see how can I leverage the data and historically what's happening with the trends and all of that, rather than me just being emotional and make the decision just because we always did it. As you said, some of the words have the negative connotations. So the whole and one good example could be one that we had. So we have those I wouldn't say town halls, but let's call them town halls, where I do have 300 plus people community informal group. We call it Data Smart Collective. We do have I have my own podcast, internal podcast, where I'm calling the guests from the different departments just to explain what they do and how we can help, how they leverage the data. So one way of leveraging and learning how the others are doing with the data and how we as the whole community can help them out. And one of the story that comes, one of the biggest, in our case, users of the data are usually the customer facing departments such as public utilities, parks and recs. We really have huge parks and recs, aquarium, and all of this, because they are almost, some of them are almost as commercial businesses. So, because we provide the services and there is some monetary exchange in that. So nothing different than the private sector. So, and one of the story goes how you just can change the narrative. So it can change the whole perspective of the success. So we had the question like, how you actually measure your success? So what's the success? And someone would say this number of this and this. And the next question is going to be, can you make it human-centric anyhow? It's a big buzzword, but it's really tough to do. So how that affects me as the resident? So when someone is saying we actually have a 99 sold maybe passes for the pools in parks and recs, and we had like 300 of the students with the those swimming classes and all of that. So how is that, what that actually means? So I shared the story, which was really good, and it kind of resonate with me. We all had that opportunity, which is really affordable. In Virginia Beach, we have something called recreation centers, so you can have your kids or someone like take the swimming classes, and we try to popularize that as much as possible. So as coastal community, we should have. So the whole stories with the coastal communities. You always hear on the some street XY, there is almost some fatality and all of that. So there is a life concern events happening when you live on the beach and all of that. So the message that we send is like, how many actually lives we save equipping with the life-saving skills someone. So it's not we skilled this. These are the people who can save someone's lives. So it's a little bit different narrative, but the number is the same. You just change, as you said. When you say taxes, oh my God. If you say investment in your future, it's a little bit different angle to look at it. Absolutely. To get the buy-in.
And you bring up human-centric data. This is something that's come up on the podcast quite a lot recently. And I think in many ways, as you just said, it's actually more human-centric for you than, say, a listed company or a private company, because the data that you maneuver and how you're putting yourself in that story is going to directly affect, whether someone lives or dies, or whether someone has access to electricity or not, which is really fantastic. And I think my next question would be, what character do you play in this story? Are you the disruptor, the culture changer? Are you the salesperson trying to sell data? Are you all and more of these things?
I consider more myself almost all of that, but I would say mostly like a change agent at this point. I got to the point where we are at some like almost hitting the threshold that I'm feeling comfortable with getting into the data-driven culture, meaning like the data is accepted and used in your decision-making process every day. So I started with something I call purpose statements. So when I built the office, the first thing we did, it's like, as everybody else in the private sector would do, you know what, let us actually build what we are all about, what are our pillars, and what is the purpose statement or mission, vision, however we call it purpose. What's our purpose? Let's answer that question. Where you feel your role is, the same as you would ask me. So we said at the beginning, our is actually to promote data-driven culture at all levels of decision-making process. So when we say at all levels, the first is we said, you know what? It is not only top management and it's not only people on the field. So it should be all. We had the different approach where we're going to approach to someone, and I will explain that later. And the last one was to have the flow of information as seamless as possible. So we are enabler from the all technological perspective too, and skills perspective. From technological, we start pushing a little bit more cloud, since we're saying the data needs to be accessible securely securely is the keyword always, from anywhere at any device. So we already start promoting this, and from the legacy that something is, we call it on-prem, that something is laying with you, it's siloed, to a little bit more different environment, which again can sit in your home, but you feel a little bit kind of open to share. So, and I made even one of the kind of like analogy on one of the meetings promoting this, just to explain it. We have that whole data governance kind of talk. So then in data governance, the first one is the data owner, and I really kind of like didn't like that word, honestly, because when you say data owner, someone actually might get the whole impression I own it and I can do with that whatever I want. So then I asked, the question was like, okay, let's raise the hands, who is the homeowner over here? And you can see like 90% of the hands are up and everybody is a homeowner. And I said, okay, from now on, let's say 9 months from now, even less, stop paying your mortgages. And now I'm repeating the same question. 9 months from now, you didn't pay your mortgage. How many of you are homeowners? Suddenly you see that not so many hands up. So I'm saying the same is with the data. You are just good trustee of that data. So you are the one who is empowering the data. You are the one, the same with the house. You keep your house clean, you fix your house, you hope that you're going to get some equity with the house. Same is with the data. We are trusting you that data, that you're going to use it correctly, that you're going to promote it, and that you're going to take good care of that data. And lastly, I'm saying the same way as we are kind of like messing up with our neighbors when we see that they don't care much about their house, we call, because it kind of like lower down the equity on our house. Same is going to go with the data. If I see someone not giving me or using that data properly, I would like you be empowered at least to raise that and say, can we use that? So to kind of democratize data as much as possible. So that's one of the part of the whole the data-driven culture that takes time. So to avoid and reuse the data, to kind of avoid redundancy, everybody is kind of building on their own stovepipes, siloed. So that's the biggest challenge within the whole data-driven culture. As we said, you can be data-driven within your own department and be savvy and all of that, but not outside. So that's another piece that needs to be addressed, like how we can share that across the board, what actually can be shared. So we understand not all data is equal. So the same goes with this. So we understand there are compliance and all of that, but the governance needs to be put in place.
Mm. And I've got a ton of questions on the back of that. My first one is about the data owner, and here at the Data Storytellers, we like to consider ourselves as jargon busters, as buzzword bullies. You know, we don't, and it kind of has been caught up in this, but the way you've just digested that, makes a lot of sense. And how do you break down this fear that surrounds the ownership of data? You mentioned, you use terms like empowerment and trustee. How do you encourage people to be happy about being trusted with the data? Just like, how do you convince someone that it's better to buy a house than to rent one?
So again, that's a cultural thing, and again, it needs to be changed. And the city of Virginia Beach is a huge, as I said, 8,000 people organization. We have 40 departments, and I couldn't say that we have across the board the same culture. I would say maybe yes, in some sense, but we have lots of mini cultures within. So the first step I was doing with my folks, we did this, and I said, listen guys, let us actually simplify this as much as possible. I like simplicity. So if we can simplify it and be focused, then we can, I know that nothing can be addressed over the night. So we build the kind of matrix like X and Y, where you have the influence and impact scale, which is pretty much, I would say, subjective at this point, because there was no at the moment anything that quantifiable that we can put in some senses, especially from the influence and impact. Everybody feels that, yeah, I'm important. At the same time, yes, the things I do are important, but let's be as objective as possible. So in that scale, we put something where we actually influence people, but the things that we do are not that impactful. So then I know where we're going to focus. We're going to focus on, let's say, maybe data literacy at that point, because we can influence them. I know whatever we say, that they will be pretty acceptive. So we are partners. And now maybe they're going to be more open to see and let us know how they can leverage data so they can see the value. And we bring them up in that quadrant where we're saying, oh, we can influence them, and we work on the impactful things. So that's your A customer. Okay. On the same side, we might not have influence on some departments or stuff that's really impactful. Then that's where I'm coming in and I'm saying, listen, then we need to build a relationship. So there are two different approaches, and how you do with any of them. With a relationship, you knock at the door, you introduce yourself, you talk, you make the relationship as informal at that point as possible. Then ask the question what you can do for them. I'm not telling someone what they can do. On the other side, you already influence them, and you can tell them, oh, maybe you should do this. In this case, you're just building the relationship and saying what I can do, without any I would say at that point something that can start hurting relationship, because we all have some kind of vanity in it. So until you make the relationship, that's more relationship play rather than being like from the data quantifiable or impactful way what to work on. In that case, you take whatever they feel it is important, and over the time you might even learn why is that important, and change your perspective and change that from, I thought it's not impactful, but now I see it is. If that makes sense, then you move and play on that. So that was the step, and you kind of like, you can't do all. You start kind of, that's 80-20 rule. I said it's always applicable wherever you go. I mean, like, you can't avoid it. So you pick your top customers and try to develop them more, but don't forget the ones that actually can become one of the top customers too.
And we also believe really strongly in the 80-20 rule here. We talk about it, Laszlo and I, all the time. From a cultural perspective, you mentioned that it's all to do with the culture. What do you think is the definition of data-drivenness? How do you define that?
That's a really good question. I mean, like, in few words, if I can say what's the data-driven, I would say, I'm not a strong believer too. If someone is saying data-driven, is you actually have to rely on numbers, whatever they say, blindly. I don't believe in that. I mean, maybe it's going to sound strange, but working with the data and miscommunication is happening. And I think one of the statisticians back said they are statistics and damn lies. No, it was the lies, damn lies, and statistics, something like this. So the numbers can be what I'm trying to say, it's always used and abused pretty much. So there needs to be some narrative behind. There needs to be the context. There needs to be some story behind the number, just not the number that someone can validate and resonate with them. So the data-driven culture could be somewhere where they strongly about the numbers, and they're just saying, you know what, we outsourced all our decisions to some machine because everything is so clear. You have yes, no. It's so simple. You just put a couple of statements, and down the road, your decision is made. Absolutely, there's a couple of these that I absolutely would say that's the best you can do. But on the other side, you have to see the risk and the cost of those decisions. If I can afford the risk and cost, that's where I would go. And that would be part of the data-driven culture too. At the same time, somewhere where we have the huge cost and a huge risk, data-driven would be how much data real data and good data we can leverage to open up discussion. Not to make the decision, how much to inspire the people actually to critically thinking and question. So if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it ties nicely into my next question, which would be about specifically within government organizations. You know, what do you think about the state of that industry, so to speak, and in general, the progress of data-driven transformation within the, let's say the wider government sphere?
I think I'm kind of like recent government employee. I used to work for the private companies all my life, and as a matter of fact, the first chief data officer that government over here, local government, hired. I would say I had some kind of like prejudice over the government and how that works, and especially working in the government contractor before. So basically, I am more than pleased how government moves. From the administrative perspective, I always thought the government is slow because I didn't understand why. The government and not being kind of as agile as the other organization and heavy bureaucracy, it's by the nature. You have to serve equally as many people as possible, and there is no preferential system, so that makes you completely inefficient. If someone thinks that government needs to be completely efficient, then there should be then preferential kind of like treatment for some, because that's how the private organizations are efficient. But for the government, this needs. So from that perspective, I understood complexity. And why is that? The second, especially with the technology and everything, for the government, many of the things, bleeding edge technology is not accessible, and for the sense of complying with the other any compliances that might come with the government. So on that, again, we are limited with the what's happening and how progressive private sector is coming, because the risk is, again, needs to be less than so more risk averse from that side. Having said that, when you take all of that, I would say the government, especially local government, and I have friends with the state level, it's moving surprisingly fast based on the constraints that we faced as the organizations, from skill level to technology and how many people and how we need to serve. So from that perspective, and especially with the data, I'm seeing really a nice advance. Many of the organizations already recognize that the data is kind of like becoming the part of the everyday's decisions. I always said government is not, and especially when we talk about many things and people are kind of freaking out, I'm saying the government is not in the business of exploiting your data. The data comes as the news product of the things we do with the citizens, but not the ones that they are exploiting. Why the government needs so much and such data. I mean, like I'm saying, listen, guys, you gave up way more data on your social media than we will ever collect. So I don't know why they're freaking out. I think the books that we had and the some Big Brother kind of stuff, it's tied to government, but people forget that actually the commercial sector might be the one leveraging the data way more from that personalization perspective. So privacy versus personalization at this point. In our case, we always go more on the privacy. We protect our residents as much as possible, but at the same time, that hurts the service that we're taking. Again, as people can understand, we have like a wide variety of residents or customers to serve, so we need to serve everybody equally.
And that's super interesting because as an outsider, and I don't want to lead the witness too much on this next question, but the perception of a civil servant or a government worker is that it's like covered in red tape and they're lazy and they're not invested in their role.
Absolutely.
And I don't think, especially with you, I don't think that's the case. So I've got friends who work in government who they have to work within these big constraints that big companies simply don't have. The success metrics aren't simply, how many military vehicles am I selling to the government, or how many cans of Pepsi am I selling
exactly
in a location, or getting bottled, or whatever. It's so much more complex and convoluted than that. So I think a big factor that kind of matters more in government than it would in a private sector, in fact, maybe not the same, maybe they're quite comparable, is that between a good and a bad organization is the quality of the leaders in there. So what do you think are the qualities of the leaders who inspire real change and real investment, and who are successful at driving these transformations? I know earlier you mentioned stuff around communications and persistence, but can you delve into that a little more?
Absolutely. Let me actually just add additional complexity, let's say, with the government and all of that. So yes, there is that misconception, and there's some parts it is almost like justifiable perception when you meet some, but that says the same, like even in the private industry where you go, you always have the employees is the face of the organization. So depend whom you met, that's how you perceive the whole organization. So that's one of the things I'm trying to push with my folks, and we always saying, listen, we are the face of our organization. So however you act, whatever you show, it is how someone is perceiving the whole organization. So if you, as you said, you're lazy, you're slow and all of that, they're going to say, oh my God, the government is like this. So that's inevitable. But someone might have the different experience. So they're going to say, oh my God, these guys are like almost moving fast, like spaceships. And then that's fine too. But what I'm trying to say, not all of us are same, and everything needs to be addressed differently. So one of the things we constrain with the government, and now it's becoming maybe a good thing, like tenure of because government always had a different way to keep their employees. Okay, so either it's some kind of good benefits that they had. Some people I really like to work for the government. So depends where you're coming from. We have the huge tenure. So with that comes you work for something for a long time, and over the time the change is not as frequent as in the private sector. So you're becoming less and less acceptable from the change, and by the nature people don't accept the change like, oh my God, with open arms. So then you become kind of like change aversive over the time. And I'm saying it's not because only about from your personality perspective, but I'm telling about the constraints, because the change with technology is not coming as quick as in the private sector because of the many reasons. We just can take let's say the cloud, government cloud versus the commercial cloud. You're going to see how many of the nice stuff that you can see is available on the commercial, but the government not yet, because it needs to go through the different roadmap and kind of like validations to be accessible. So that's one. The change is not as frequent. So you can, and the second one, as you mentioned, something like what you actually can procure and how long it takes. Even from that standpoint, you need to think why there are so many, why the procurement might be slow, because there are so many validation checkpoints to ensure that the taxpayers' money are spent correctly. And from that standpoint is you are just good and financially responsible government employee, and that's all. So you take that, then you end up with the older workforce who are not willing any longer to change as much as they're changing on the commercial sector. Now the flip side, we are getting so many of young fools coming in because you having this like change of generations. So now I'm seeing, especially in our field, as the really good opportunity to revamp and rechange all of that. So some things might be inherited from the past, what we had, but right now everything is kind of moving differently, and nobody is any longer. I think it's they said 5 years is the tenure, like the average tenure that even in the private sector and public sector are seeing. So that's by the definition will not be as possible as it used to be. So I from that perspective, I think the government will change quickly and more open, like between almost the private public sector cross pollination. And the third piece that actually affects that much, it's the piece where government outsource something completely to private sector is more less and less. Now we're seeing more and more almost like joint operation. So it's like a partnership, like public-private partnership, especially with the new technologies and everything that's coming. So the culture comes from the private sector into the public, creeping in, like employing the people like me, getting more folks working on the same projects, etc. So I think that the whole perception will change definitely. And again, depends, like especially on the local government. It depends on the size of the city, depends on the aspiration of the city, how much someone aspire actually to move and become the modern smart city. Let me put a couple of buzzwords too, and be some. And we know the trend. That the metropolitan area is getting bigger and bigger. So definitely urbanization didn't end. It has not end and probably will not end for a long time. That will be the trend. Paul, I think you're on mute.
You're right. I was just saying that you brought up a really good point on change aversion. And I think that's a really great way to put it because, and I'm thinking about this from a wider perspective as opposed to just like City of Virginia Beach or government. But if someone has been writing down on a piece of paper for 20 years and now they're being told they need to do this process on a computer, the resistance comes from, that's the basics of neuroplasticity, right? That's, these channels that have been carved into our neural pathways. They're now there's new pathways being carved and old ones being neglected. And a really good point you made as well is that, and I think in some ways this is an advantage. Maybe you can comment on this, but when you are behind in terms of going to market, let's say with digital and data, that's not necessarily a disadvantage. You can see private companies, the mistakes they make with implementation, the mistakes they make with privacy. Look at the Marriott Starwood debacle. They've just been fined. Imagine if that came out of taxpayers' money. People wouldn't be very happy about that. So, what do you think that's an advantage? Actually, following industry as opposed to leading industry. Can you see some advantages or disadvantages to that?
No, absolutely. And as I said, it shouldn't be seen as the disadvantage. Those are just constraints put by the reason for some reasons. So they exist for the reasons. And I'm now sitting on this side, and I understand why, and I appreciate them. And as you said, like doesn't necessarily what's the kind of like leapfrog kind of that happened? Like the first market leader doesn't have to be the best one. When it comes, the same is with the government, and we do the things that I see in the government perspective that's kind of developing a little bit more and more. We see more and more gatherings, sharing of the ideas, cities being more competitive. So I'm always good for the healthy competition. I said, listen, I mean, like I'm competitive. I understand the people don't want to be, but I understand the people who want to be competitive. So depends how I believe in healthy competitiveness, if that's the word. So if we start exchanging the idea, we start promoting like each other, we start like feeling how to put this, like many of the government employees, those are like people, they're saying this is my job. Everything that I say, I to promote themselves was kind of, like is that guy is talking only about himself? It's like not popular thought. It's like kind of team, and the team spirit should be pretty big because I mean, like these guys spend like a long tenure with one organization, and for that reason, the whole trust, the whole how they perceive the organization is part of them. So it's like, hey, it's City of Virginia Beach, and I'll give you one example of this one. So basically, and I thought I like innovation, and now it's come like you don't have to be the first, and maybe not even the one using the bleeding edge technology to be innovative. So I like innovation when it's something simple but usable, and you like kind of like, oh my god, how I didn't thought of this before, because it's so simple, and you are like, it's just before me. How is that? So one of the story goes like this. We have something, and I will make that as short as possible. For people just to understand a little bit, there is some part of the city, and they call them shared right-of-ways, where it is something shared. So those are for the poles, those are for lightnings, those are for putting something from the vendor, I'm sorry, from a supplier's perspective. And I will take poles, light poles are a good example. And if the city is not well managed, and you might see if there's no coordination in that, you might see 2, 3 poles next to each other, and almost like an eyesore for the city. So city actually needs to take good care of that and saying, and as a matter of fact, it's a complete operational inefficiency. On the other side, when someone is now building that light pole, the others might see that as the perfect real estate. Many things, sensor, proliferation of sensors, the uh, 5G. Now everybody wants to put that somewhere in the city. So in the US cities is a little bit different than European cities. I'm coming from Europe, and I know some of them are actually utilizing the big buildings, and someone within the big building just signed, and then on the rooftop of that building you see like all of that happening. So in the States, maybe especially suburban cities, a little bit different. So that's one of the kind of like real estate. So in some long story short, we needed to do some third party, almost like validation of the polls. So someone is charging someone for the poll, and someone needs to go and validate that there is the light pole here and there. So they would hire someone. That someone, third party, to be completely objective, needs to sit in the car. They get the list of the polls. They hit the neighborhood. They take the picture, and they say, yes, it is the light pole, or no, there's no light pole there. Then necessity, it's the mother of invention. COVID hit, everybody start digitalizing. So my team digitalized all the maps that we have. So our maps are digitalized, and suddenly we got requests for this one. Someone needs to drive. And since we now empowered folks to be more kind of like to promote themselves, to promote what they do, if they do have the idea, bring it up, don't wait. So they talk with the vendors and all of that, and they said, what you actually doing? And the guy explained, and they are like, hold on. So what they did, they just dropped Google Street Views on the digital maps. So someone from the home can just click and say, oh yeah, it is Paul, because they're taking those with the date when the actually streetcar went. So a lot of things from the Google that they can actually exploit. But it was like it was ingenious. And that now became the talk among why I'm now sharing how the other one. So they are connected with the other municipalities, first locally, where they said, you know what, guys, if someone comes, you just build this. So they start exchanging their ideas. So being there, we are part of the community, we compete a little bit, but there is no monetary on any other, but just, as I said, not tap on the back, but saying I did it. It's kind of like, and we should take the pride. So just letting the people taking the pride in what they do and being acknowledged by the peers, it's the best reward you can get.
And that's a good point. You mentioned that obviously you've had this experience in the private sector. Do you find that, and this is a very subjective question, so do you feel more invested in your role as a citizen of the city of Virginia Beach and as a resident, as a taxpayer, as opposed to, say, previous roles or what you might be at a private company as a data leader?
I do. I can tell you that for sure. I do. I didn't mind that before, let's say, but right now I can be really critical too. So appreciative, critical, and that. So I do challenge myself, my fellow residents, people working in the same organization. Sometimes where we do leverage this and saying, what, guys, we are the taxpayers too. So you see it, you say it, and let's bring it up. And especially, let's put it this way: what we loved and we did. It's like where the money goes, because the money is always the talk. Money is the talk. Always everybody's putting, oh yeah, but let's see. So that's one of the things. Like I appreciate working for the city, giving me opportunity to be the part of the everything that happened. At the same time, living with the city. And by the way, I love Virginia Beach, and I always said, listen, guys, this is where I put my family. I moved. It was my choice. I fell in love with this. I like how everything is set it up, organized, structured. I know that I'm paying for that, but I don't mind. I actually perceive that as the bigger value what I'm getting. So when I see that something is going off, what I don't like, I already know the ways how kind of like to leverage the data and do something, especially from the open data perspective. The other one is like you learn how you can leverage many offerings that city has from the parks and recs, especially who loves it, because we are big on this. So all of that is kind of coming, and us working and living in the city is a really great opportunity. And I know that many share the same sentiment too.
That's awesome. And where do you see the biggest opportunity in data for the city of Virginia Beach right now, say over the next 12 months?
So the biggest opportunity is something that we started, and it's one of the biggest game changer in the whole adoption of the data as the kind of data-driven culture from the data-driven culture perspective. So we recently, our partner developed a wholly new office where we introduced performance stats, something called performance stats. I know when I said that I came from the private sector and that was something given, you didn't even establish, you found it. So it's kind of like when you figure it out that you don't have that within the departments, when you ask them what's your success, how you measure your success. Now we're going back to the story, but what's actually important to the residents rather than what you feel is important. Then that's completely different narrative. People did measure before, but right now we have the whole effort where we are from the have the different offices engaging the stakeholders, from companies, businesses to residents, what they find important and how we can kind of like from our city perspective, see if we are working toward what's important for the residents and businesses. So each and every department are going through that transformation right now. We play a huge part in it. I think I feel that my office prepared the organization pretty well. As I said, we're running the same race, but not at the same pace. The first step we did was we called that Data Academy. We open up something where we're going to empower and actually upskill the folks in the data with the tools, skills, and all of that, because that was not non-existent before. So that's one of my kind of like biggest pride that I take. It's like being like having that Data Academy and from that Data Academy, we actually have that Data Smart Collective, 300 plus people, strong group who are every time upskill themselves, keep themselves up to date. Whatever new is coming, big change, we chat about it and kind of like organize the datathons or hackathons, however you call it, challenging with the new data sets to break the silos and all of that. So, but right now, coming from that was bottom up. And right now, we top down initiative with the performance where now something needs to be measured, and we didn't do that beforehand because we really wanted first to upskill the people who are work with the data before someone start asking them for the data, if that makes sense. So the first was like, let's upskill them bottom up. Then now we feel really comfortable pushing down that they will be able and capable to actually deliver what they are asked.
And I have just one more question for you. I've had a really fun time today, and I've taken a ton of notes. What recommendations and advice would you give to data leaders today?
The only recommendation I could have, and we all share the same, it's like just stay in touch. Sometimes when you lead, and I like leading by example, how everything is changing and how quickly everything changes. Some of the practices and their standard, I don't think they will change that much, but the approach to many things are actually changing. The society is changing, the demand is changing, the way you consume something is changing, and the best way, it's like just to keep in touch and be involved in some projects like hands-on. So for example, I would never go out and say, listen guys, we should do something, unless I am involved almost as the equal partner and doing something, being even assigned. That might be even the just taking the requirements, from the standpoint of taking requirements and being actively involved in some project, just to understand, to get a pulse from both how people are doing, what's happening out there. So I would say this industry is still evolving. We are not there yet. I know there's a huge talk, but we are not there yet as some well-established functions that we have, because we're still kind of trying to find our place, and that needs to be something that we need to stay still on the pulse and just checking out what's happening. So,
Bojan, I've had a really great time, great conversation. Thank you for coming on the show, and we'll be in touch soon. I'm really looking forward to getting this one out there.
Hey, Paul, it was my pleasure. I hope I kind of shared something really useful for the people outside. I do appreciate this type of the education. I always said education, sharing the thoughts, the same, like now we're sharing our data in just different format, and the information is out there, and I really enjoy the talk as well. Thank you very much for having me.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.